The best budget weightlifting belt might not be the cheapest. I think it comes down to three things: materials, design, craftsmanship. Here's what I mean. In terms of materials, the weightlifting belt cannot stretch. It has to try to provide a rigid ring around your core that you can brace against. These belts here are sitting on a hide of sole bend leather. This is what it looks like after we cut straps out of it. Okay, it's very thick, it's very stiff, it's very firm, and this is the minimum standard that you would want in a budget weightlifting belt. There are belts that will use something that is different than this. Here's a belt made out of something called split leather, and you can kind of see what it looks like here. This is, as it sounds, it's actually split off the bottom of a hide like this. The structural properties, the grain is much looser. It's a much more flexible material. It's not one that lasts for a long time versus this. And that's what we're talking about with materials. It matters what you start with, and it matters the most out of the three things that we mentioned. Another big thing with materials is the hardware. So you might can see on this belt that it actually is getting some rust on the buckle area. This is a plain steel buckle. The ones we use are stainless steel, so we don't have that rust problem. The other thing is with the rivets. These smaller rivets, over time, these can actually pull through the leather. Sometimes they can even pop off the belt if they're not strong enough. And we use a very different type of structural rivet that is much more suited to making a weightlifting belt. One of the things you can see if a weightlifting belt is made either too thin or out of what I would consider substandard material is that it will stretch like this does. But if the weightlifting belt stretches, it doesn't perform the main function that we need it to do, and that is to be a rigid ring around our core to brace against. Let's move on to design. By design, I mean the things that are going to affect your experience of using the weightlifting belt. I'll give you one example right here. Here's an inexpensive weightlifting belt made by somebody else, and if I try to buckle this, if I try to tuck this end up under the keeper, there's a couple of problems here. One, this keeper is too small, it's too close to the buckle, and this end has not been thinned to the point where this is an easy thing to do. Here's one of our 4-inch black suede belts. One thing that we do is this tail end of the belt, you can see like from the holes down, this actually tapers down to a thinner thickness so that this right here is much easier to do. It's an ergonomic thing, it's a small detail, but it's something that makes the usability of the belt very different from, say, an inexpensive belt. Another detail with design is this area right here under the buckle. When you put the keeper between this buckle fold, it's going to produce a bulge, okay? And we cause that bulge to be pushed to the top side and this bottom to be as flat as possible. There are other belts that don't pay attention to this, and you can see that this bulge is completely in the area where it's just going to press into your stomach. So this is something that you would want to look for in terms of design, and this belt would fail on that specific one. One more feature of design I can show on this belt: when you go from the full thickness of the belt down into the buckle area, you typically thin this down a little bit because you don't need full thickness when you're wrapping around the buckle. However, it matters how and where you thin this. On this belt, as you can see, they thinned it before this rivet right here. So if, you know, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, they've created a weak link in this chain by thinning the belt too early before this first rivet instead of after. On one of our belts, yes, we do thin this. It's well after the first rivet, going through the keeper, and it's thinned as much as we need to be able to make this buckle fold area. But the thinning happens after the rivet, not before, so that we don't create this weak link right here that is the weakest part of our belt. The third thing on our list, craftsmanship, this is the one that's hardest to describe, and it's the one that you can't see in a picture, but nonetheless has a big difference in the experience you're going to have with using your belt. One example I would show is with this belt that's made by somebody else. This buckle here, look at one of our buckles. It should not be loose, okay? But it should move freely to allow for easy buckling and unbuckling. This one is so tight that it's almost to the point of being bound up. That's a craftsmanship thing. The buckle is not wide enough for how wide the leather is at this point, and so this buckle ends up being very difficult to use. Another thing with craftsmanship is the same thing we talked about with the buckling before. This end should be thinned down to make it easier when we buckle to slide this under the keeper. That's one of those things that you're never going to see in a picture, but nonetheless is going to be a thing that you will notice every time you use the belt. How easy is that to do? Whether it's a single ply belt or whether it's one of our suede belts, these are going to have nice beveled edges. It's not going to be something that you can see on camera, but this does not have beveled edges. This also has painted edges, which to my thumb feel like basically sandpaper. These edges have edge paint on them, so they're not rounded, but the edge paint itself, it's a function of two things. One, the material they used, but two, the finishing they did. They didn't do any polishing or burnishing on this edge, and it has a rough feel like sandpaper. Just to try to show the difference, I brought over one belt that we're working on right now. This is a custom lever belt we're doing for someone, and we are painting the edges because on most of our belts we don't. On some of them we do. We finish this edge when we edge paint it so that it's got a nice smooth feel to it and not the rough sandpaper feel that some of the more inexpensive belts do. So all of that to say, what is the best budget weightlifting belt? It is going to be one that meets our three criteria: materials, design, craftsmanship. What our single ply belts do is exactly that. Materials, we talked about the sole bend leather that these things are made out of. It's very stiff, it's very thick. Most importantly, it doesn't stretch so that it gives you something to effectively brace against. That's the most important thing. Design, we talked about all the things as far as making this easy to buckle, making it comfortable by paying attention to this buckle area. Again, on materials, the stainless buckle and the aluminum rivets that are never going to give you a problem. And craftsmanship, we talked about edges, we talked about finish, stitching. All of these things go together to make a belt that is the minimum standard that you would want for a weightlifting belt. Now, these single plies are not cheap per se. As we're recording this today, I think we've got these at, about $130. But the inexpensive belt that you might buy might be more expensive. It might be more expensive because, number one, it might not work right out of the box for some of the reasons we've talked about. Number two, it might not work because it wears out in 6 months. You might have an instance where you actually tear from one hole to the other because of materials. So materials, design, craftsmanship. All three are very important. All three are considered very carefully in our single ply belts. That's why I believe that a single ply belt, such as these, is the basic minimum best budget option for a weightlifting belt. I hope this has been helpful. If it has, please like and subscribe. We put out new videos every week trying to give more information about weightlifting belts. If you want to check out our weightlifting belts and all of our single ply options, DominionStrengthTraining.com. I'll put the link in the description. And otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks.